on the family farm in Dearborn, Michigan. Even as a young man, Ford possessed an unblinking faith in progress. He had no doubt that technology, especially mechanization, offered the path to a better life and a better world. But during his lifetime, investigators observed damaging effects of machine labor on workers' minds and bodies, and social reformers bitterly criticized industrial machines for destroying the lives of women and child workers. Writers of all stripes faulted the industrial system for weakening the bonds of community, aggravating class hostilities, and producing widespread alienation. Now, Ford would have none of this at all. He preached the gospel of prosperity without a shred of doubt in his mind, and he extolled the virtues of a thoroughly mechanized economy and society. I think it's important to note that culturally speaking, Americans then and now embraced Ford's gospel with only a modest level of dissent. I think it's one of the least appreciated aspects of Ford's legacy, and we'll cover this in the series as well. Now, these generalities aside, Ford's life began on a modestly sized family farm in southeast Michigan. At that time, much of the state of Michigan was in a frontier condition, and the United States was at war with itself, with Union troops winning victories over Confederate forces at Gettysburg and Vicksburg only a few weeks before Henry Ford's birth. Now, keep in mind that the United States was still a very young country at the time, less than 90 years old, and the last remaining Continental Army veterans from the American Revolution were still living when Henry Ford was born. On the other hand, Detroit had been settled by French Catholics in the colonial era and had developed into an important hub of the fur trade. By 1860, the town's population reached 45,000 and had the trappings of a mid-19th century American city with retail districts, ethnic neighborhoods, and an array of civic clubs and activities to give it a measure of vitality. But as you left rapidly urbanizing Detroit, the town's outlying neighborhoods gave way to a landscape of open country farming by homesteaders. Henry Ford's grandfather arrived to this area from Ireland at the time of the Great Famine of the late 1840s. He and his family suffered the effects of the potato blight and the subsequent humanitarian catastrophe that killed 1 million people. Farming was all he knew, and the U.S. had land in the upper Middle West to clear, so he settled down to farm in Redford Township, some 9 miles from Detroit. He labored to clear his 80 acres from forest cover and tree roots, and I want you to kind of think of how hard of a task this was in an age before chainsaws, and backhoes, and tractors. And he and his son, this would be Henry Ford's father, William, worked on the Michigan Central Railroad for supplemental income. Within a few years, the Ford family had a working farm, half of which William eventually purchased for himself and his wife in order to raise a family. And Henry Ford was born at this spot in 1863. Frankly, there isn't a lot of drama to report regarding Ford's early years. In many ways, he lived an idyllic childhood. His parents were relatively affluent by rural Michigan standards, and they provided a loving and supportive home for him and his siblings. He recalled in his memoir, and I'm going to quote here, "There is a legend that my parents were very poor and that the early days were hard ones. Now, certainly they were not rich, but neither were they poor. As Michigan farmers went, we were prosperous. The house in which I was born is still standing, and it and the farm are part of my present holding." Ford's aging grandfather taught him the names of birds and trees on their walks around the farm, and there's sort of a semi-well-known story that Ford's father walked him to the fields to show him a nest of eggs under a tree, and he then plowed around them rather than disturb the nest in order to show the young boy that he should value all living things and to respect the natural environment. Now, many years later, when the Ford Motor Company was established and Ford had more free time, these childhood experiences grew into a larger interest in nature and the natural environment. He sought out and befriended the famous naturalist and author John Burroughs. Both loved birds and hiking in the woods and experiencing nature, and they ventured out on camping trips that included Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, and other figures from the world of business and manufacturing. It's important to keep in mind that Ford's childhood is largely a remembered childhood. What I mean by that is our understanding of his youth comes largely from his own reminiscence.